Hey everybody, and welcome to today's podcast on men's mental health. Now, so I predominantly work with women, and it is usually undoing the work that has come from men or society, usually other women and things that have said or feeling not about themselves. But obviously, as a man who has dealt with mental health and has a lot of friends that I've helped over the time, I think that we need to speak about it more, but we need to speak about it in a different way. I'm going to explain my ideas. Now, this isn't I've cured men's mental health. By absolutely no way, shape or form is that the case. It is more a case of I've been doing just research into it, getting some things from fellow guys. And the whole thing is that we don't talk about it enough. And we feel weak for opening up about weakness and things like that. But I think there's more to it than that. I think this is because, as you'll see in a minute, how we communicate as men is very different to women, and because we're stuck in one method, I think this is what's letting us down. So let's go into the first bit. My take on mental health as a whole is that we are set up wrong in general on how to deal with mental health. We classify things with the there's two different classification systems used for mental health. There's the ICI 5, I believe, and there's another one I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, the problem with this is that we're putting mental health into boxes, but we're not just putting them into boxes, we're doing it like a Russian doll. So each box, we start with a large box, which is mental health, and every single thing gets put down into a smaller box. Now, if those boxes were interchangeable, we'd probably be okay, but they're not. They're done very much like a Russian doll. So whatever's in the smallest box can never come out of the smallest box, and this is the problem where everything has been compressed and compressed and compressed and compressed. It doesn't allow it to expand. Sometimes the smallest problem then becomes the biggest problem, but because it's stuck in this tiny jar, it can't go anywhere. You know, anyone who's ever seen a Russian doll before, it's that set of dolls that starts at one size, you open it up, there's another one, you open it up, there's another one, another one, another one, and they only go back in one order. You can't change that order, otherwise they don't fit back together. Now, my theory is that they should be more like Lego blocks, in that they're all the same size, they're interstackable, and they all have relevance depending on the time. And I think this is one of the issues overall with mental health, that we keep trying to compress things down to make it more manageable, when clearly that's the problem. We can't manage it right now for whatever reason, so we need to stop trying to compress it down to make it more manageable. What we actually maybe need to do is open it up more so that more people can get involved, and therefore we don't find ourselves in boxes, because we don't like being in boxes. If anything has been proven from this bloody lockdown that we're in right now, is that people don't like being told that they can only do so much and being confined. We're not used to it. Next bit is men not talking may not just be due to stigma. Okay, there's this whole thing that men are told that, you know, men don't talk enough because of stigma of being weak, etc., etc. Now, if you're told something enough, you'll probably believe that that's the case. And a lot of the guys, when I did a QA on my Instagram last night, a lot of it was, it needs to be talked about more, it's not talked about enough, I feel weak when I open up about struggling, and, you know, we live in a world where people don't care about men's health, and this is all from men. There was one of my female friends that said it's just as important as women's health, and it is. Like, all mental health is completely as important as each other's. But again, the main theme is that we're not doing it, and we've been telling men to talk more at least for the last 15 years. You know, I'm 33 this year, and I can, at least from the age of being 15, it was always encouraged that men needed to talk more because of men's mental health being on the decline, and yet we're not doing it. We aren't changing. We are not doing this now still. 15 years later, men are still not talking. I think it might just be nothing to do with the stigma. It might just be actually how men are wired to talk, and we're not doing it in the right way. So I'll get some stats up just, you know, to show why, you know, this is the case of things. So in 2017, the suicide rate for men was 3.5 times higher than it is for women. The suicide rate is highest among middle-aged white men, who accounted for almost 70% of all suicides in 2017. Research also suggests that while women attempt suicide more often, men choose more lethal methods of suicide, which is very interesting. This will come into something that I'm going to change, I'm going to explain later on, the difference between male and female. So there is actually a logic towards that. The World Health Organization reports that suicide represents half of all male violent deaths worldwide. Men over the age of 65 are at the greatest risk of suicide. These are some pretty startling facts, but the thing is that the biggest killer of men is ourselves. As it says, it's more middle-aged white men who account for most of it. Whatever reason that is, racial, geographical, whatever. It may be more societal because European men, white men, and white society is not as community-driven as it is in other ethnic groups. The black community is very close on community. The Muslim community is very close on community. The Asian can be as well. As we get older, we tend to push our elderly away, or we feel that they're going to be fine because we've created a stable society. There's not as much integration of families as there is in other ethnic groups. So another theories we've got here, this is all pulled off of a mental health site. I just grabbed it because, again, when I give you examples, this is the stuff you're going to find. I'm not going to go and read into massive medical research text because, to be honest, you probably won't find them or you wouldn't understand what they're saying anyway. Traditional male gender roles discourage emotional expression. Men are told they need to be tough and that they should not need to ask for help. Such rigid gender norms may make it difficult for men to reach out and to ask for support when they need it. Now, I contest this a little bit because I don't think that's been written properly, and this is the massive problem. It's all about language and how we use it. Now, traditional male gender roles discourage emotional expression. They don't, they just do in normal situations, and this is the problem. Again, we are using the wrong method. Being told that we're tough and that we shouldn't need to ask for help is not exactly what we're told. We are told that we need to be resilient and that we should try and do things for ourselves, but it can carry over in the wrong way. There is a misunderstanding in communication, not necessarily just saying that men tell men not to talk, because we don't, because we have been screaming at each other to talk more for 15 years at least, and as you can see by the stats, it's still not working. So even when men are telling other men to talk, there's something going wrong there. Depression may be undiagnosed in men. Men often do not disclose feelings of depression to their doctors. When they do, it is often described in terms of having problems at work or in relationships. Men also tend to describe their feelings as stress rather than sadness or hopelessness. Again, miscommunication. Also, a little stat that I'll bring back again in a minute. Women are more prone to negative emotion than men. On the board. Women feel negative emotions a lot more than men do. This can be a maternal trait because you have to be aware of when children are in a negative mood because that's your job. Men don't have that reflex. This is often why when, not all men are, I'm usually an exception to that rule, but, there's always that ongoing argument. You don't seem very sensitive. You don't seem to know when I'm in a bad mood. It's because we're not tuned into it, okay? We're not tuned into it as much as women, which is why women tend to be more open about their depression and their feelings because they're more in tune with them. Men are less likely to seek help for emotional problems. Research suggests that depression is diagnosed less frequently in men because of a tendency to deny illness, self-monitor symptoms, and self-treat. That I agree with, yes. There is another reason for that as well, I think, which I'll explain in a little bit. But for the most part, we live in a society where we can't afford to be ill. We can't. We aren't set up for illness. You can get treated and you can get fixed, but most places don't give very good statutory sick pay, especially in the UK. Statutory sick pay is a joke. Most companies won't pay it. A lot of men are self-employed, myself included. If I don't work, I don't get paid. So even when I had COVID earlier this year, I had the minimal amount of time I could have off before I could speak on a microphone to do my online classes. This is the problem. Men are driven by task, not necessarily about limitations, okay? And this is what I'm going to get into later on, which is why, again, we're using the wrong methods to treat men's mental health, and yet we keep saying that men aren't talking enough. It's like, you're not using the right language. It's like speaking to somebody in Finnish if you come from anywhere else in the world, because if you don't know, Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian all have the same weird dialect that nobody else understands, okay? So we're basically speaking Finnish to somebody from the UK. You're not going to understand what's going on. Men may be more likely to self-treat symptoms of depression with alcohol and other substances. Again, this is a coping mechanism because we just want to be able to get over it and get back to what we're doing because we are task-orientated. That is not the best way to do it. We've all been there. I've done it. I've used alcohol to treat my depression and stuff sometimes. It's not the best way to do it at all because it doesn't solve the problem, but it takes the edge off. And again, as I've said in previous podcasts, men and women and everybody is not interested in being happy. They just want to take the pain away. And if you can get something that will do that relatively easy on a frequent basis, you're going to move towards it. So this is what they suggest we should do for men who are more likely to have depression and such like. Well, men in general, how do we help with men's mental health? So identify men who are at risk and offer support. As we've said, it's white middle-aged men and men over the age of 65 that are most vulnerable to suicide and mental health. So we need to be targeting those people more and setting up bespoke things for them. Okay? There aren't as many male mental health services as there are women. There aren't as many, shelter places and things like that because, as I'll get into in a minute, men tend to be slightly more that way inclined in the problem area, as in causing it, etc., etc. Teach men coping and problem-solving skills to help them manage challenges with work, relationships, and health issues. Again, that's fine, but you have to teach male-orientated coping and problem-solving skills, not female-orientated ones. And this is, again, something I'm going to get into in a minute. We are not using male methods to treat male problems. Make mental health support options readily available. Yes, we need to do that across the board regardless. There's not enough of it. Our mental health services are stretched to the limit. Knowing a few people that work in it, and including myself, there's not enough of us to go around. Create opportunities that bring groups of people together so they can form social connections and find support. Restricts access to lethal means of suicide such as firearms and prescription drugs. This is obviously a US-based one, but it does carry over. Over here it's not so bad. We can't get hold of guns. We have to use other means and stuff in the UK, which is not any less tragic, but they're less quite extreme. The biggest one I will take from that, and this is what I'm going to get into in a minute, is create opportunities that bring groups of people together so they can form social connections and find support. One of the biggest reasons that they also put on here is that men find mental health problems when they can't secure lasting friendships, relationships, and jobs. There has been numerous studies that finding men in groups actually helps men's mental health, which is why there's been a massive rise of why guys get massively into computer games. We're not in it because we want to disappear. We're not in it because we want to spend all the time away from other halves. But it seems to be the only acceptable way we can hang around with guys, be guys, say things that guys say, and still have a job to do. There was an interesting story came out that a guy playing, I think it was like Call of Duty or some first-person shooter, was actually saved from his friends from suicide because they had noticed that he wasn't performing his job role properly in the squad. And they stopped the game, they found out what was going on, they realised he was depressed and that he was suicidal, and they got him help. Now, that's not men not talking. That's men talking in a way that men want to talk. And I keep saying I'm going to get into it later because I don't want to steamroll myself off a bit. But this is a massive thing that I'm going to allude to. Men need other men in groups. We don't do well as individuals. We have to have our small hunting parties. Men, generally, if you look across most guys, they have 5 to 6 friends total. That's it. They have other associates and things, but the main core group of people they hang around with is about 6 people, and they all have a job. There's a funny one, there's a leader, there's somebody who comes up with ideas, there's somebody who can create things, there's somebody that offers is a calming influence, is a diffuser, etc., etc. And what you will find with men is that if somebody comes in that does a job better than the last one, that guy gets phased out. Is it the right way to treat people? No, but that's how we do it. So we need to work with the systems we have. And this is why sporting is really important to guys. That camaraderie, that team, that, life around something that is still goal orientated, that everybody can keep an eye on you if you're not performing that task outside of injury and etc., etc. Again, when it was going down the pub and stuff, and this is what I'm going to get into in a minute, men coming together in groups to talk and just be themselves and offload was very important, and society doesn't like that anymore. It's getting better, and we're realizing that men do need to talk, and there's a lot of guy-orientated adverts in society saying men need to go down the pub or do something to come together, but that was made incredibly difficult by this wave of toxic masculinity, toxic male traits, which I'm going to explain in a minute because I fucking hate that word, and it's just so ridiculous because that's what's killing more men than anything else. Saying that toxic masculinity exists without a counter option just tells you that men are bad. And saying that male-dominated traits on the Big 5 scale, which I'm going to explain as well, are inherently bad, well, how's that going to help anybody's mental health by knowing that just for the fact that you're a male and you have male traits, that's a bad thing and you should do everything you can to not do it? It's very difficult when you don't understand what that means. So, looking at the stats as well, men don't talk to one another outside tight social groups, as I've said. I think that is a possible evolutionary trait to not feel vulnerable, because vulnerability is a massive reason why men don't open up outside of social groups. Now, if you have a very tight-knit social group, you have no problem telling people that you are suffering. You don't, because you know them, you trust them, they know you, they know who you are, and they know that if you're going to say that you don't feel right, they're going to do something about it. Now, from a whole population perspective, males are out to attract a mate. We are just really, really unevolved. We're just not as evolved as we think we are, okay? We still have base traits and base urges. Men want to be the alpha, because if you are the alpha, you have the most chance of getting the female that wants to choose you, because we as a species are, females are sexually selective, as in that they choose who they mate with. It's not like in the animal kingdom where they'll just take anybody who turns up. The dominant male goes and breeds with everybody. Women choose who they want. So men have to compete for being the strongest candidate to procreate. And if you are seen as vulnerable, and I'm sorry to say this, ladies, and some of you will say you want a vulnerable man, not in the beginning. You don't. You don't, because it's been proven time and time again that you want a strong, physically superior male to breed with. You want the vulnerable male afterwards to do the nurturing. The trouble is, for the most part, it's very hard to turn that one off to the other. The amount of times, personally, myself, when I was overly sensitive, because that's what I am, I'll explain in a minute how on the big 5 traits, I literally score high in every single one that women are higher in, okay? I think very female-mindedly, which is why, actually, I came to this conclusion that we're not dealing with things in a male way, because even though I think, or I have more female dominant traits, I'm still a man, and I still behave like one because I'm still high in some of the male-dominated ones. We are evolved to be strong, to put up a big scene, because we're trying to get women. Women like men that are strong. We take it all the time. And the trouble is as well, every woman has a hierarchy in which she places a man. If they want a sensitive man, they want to find the most sensitive man, because that's what they're looking for. It's the same across all boards. Anything that we're trying to find and trying to look for, we will try and find the best possible candidate for it. But outside, if we have a tight social group, like my friends will talk to me very easily, because we can trust one another and we know that we're there to look out for one another, because we have a group, we have a job, we all have a role, we want each other to perform that role to the best of our abilities. If we're not doing that, we've got to fix it, because the group doesn't work without it. So I'm going to go into the whole toxic masculinity thing a bit more as well, because basically the term toxic masculinity is saying that male basic traits, assertiveness, social dominance, aggressiveness, disagreeableness and things like that are all just bad. Bad. Don't do that. Don't be that. You are pre-programmed to be like that. Men on the whole are less agreeable than women. If you have, it's called the bell curve. If you put everybody in the middle, there's not much going on in ways of like, percentages of it. But if you go to the extreme ends, the most disagreeable people are always men, because we're built that way. That's why the most people in prison are men, because they are, and then you find the most, even if you took all of the prisoners across the world, the most disagreeable of those would be men. It's just something to do with the way that our, personality traits work, that are ingrained in, right? So, as I've said, I think we're using a female solution to a male problem. And that in itself is why I think we're not working, because women find it a lot easier to talk than men. They're programmed to talk. They are social. They're the social side of the gender scale. Men, from an evolutionary standpoint, as I've said, we haven't evolved as far as we think we have. We've just built really nice huts to live in. Men, small groups, because there's less men in the world than women. Men, you only need one male to create as many babies as possible. This is how nature works. Women will always be more than men. They are more populated across the world anyway. Men in small groups go off, do job. They are away from the runnings of the village for a very long time. Women are the ones that hear everything. They gossip, they talk. They have a very expansive network of things that are going on. This is very useful. Of course, we need to know what the hell's going on when we come back from a hunting trip or a war or whatever else that we were doing at the time, to know how the state of the city is when we come back. This is also why men, on the whole, don't understand the need for gossip. We don't understand a few things, and that's a big miscommunication between men and women when they start talking about something and we go blank, because it's not something that sparks our interest. It never has done. And this again can cause problems later on, especially when women are like, you don't seem to listen to me. It's like, I am listening to you. You know, it's just that when it's idle gossip and stuff about day-to-days, it doesn't trigger a response from us, and I'll explain why that is in a little bit. Wow, get a monster dad, yeah. Okay, so I'll explain the big 5 traits to you. So the big 5 traits are agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and openness to experience. Okay, these are the big 5 personality traits. You can do a test for yourself to find out where you are on the big 5 personality traits. Very, very interesting. I really suggest you do it. It doesn't cost that much. I think it's only about £10-15 to do it. And just see where you sit. Now, this is interesting because, just on a little side note, it doesn't put you in a box, which is what I like about it. It just tells you where you would score in a group of 100 people, how much more or less of these you would be. And this is probably the most accurate personality scoring test you can do. They've done it across multiple means. They've tested it, and this is pretty much the most accurate one you can come across. Okay, so agreeableness. Women are naturally just higher in agreeableness anyway. That's how it works. Men are less agreeable than women, which is, it's just one of those traits, okay? In compassion, women are 61% more compassionate than men, and they are 59% more polite than men across the whole. Obviously, on the extreme ends, you will find that it's more so women than men. Conscientiousness. Now, this isn't about how conscious you are of other people's feelings. So conscientiousness is split in between orderliness and industriousness. And women score higher on conscientiousness because of their orderliness, more so. Again, this is another thing. Men are less orderly than women. We don't mind mess and chaos and things going on. Women like order. Maybe it's a nesting instinct, whatever that's been built in. They like to have things in order because it's safe. And you have small people around. And to have things clean and orderly is better. Now, I'm not saying that this is like men aren't, but I'm saying out of the two of you, you'll probably find that the male is less worried about mess than women, okay? Industriousness, men score higher. Now, industriousness is the need to work, the need to have a task, the need to have a purpose. People who are industrious, which again generally is more men than women, it's a 50, pretty much 50-50 split. But towards the end, what we're talking about with mental health, men are far more industrious. They need a purpose, they need a role, they need to know they're contributing in a positive way to either to themselves or others around them. When that doesn't happen, and most of the time, depression spikes in men happen through around the unemployment mark, which is why over 65s have a trouble, because when they retire, they lose their purpose. They don't know what to do, which is why it is very important, if you are a male who's over the age of 65 listening to this, to go and get a hobby. Find something to do. Use the skills that you've learned, transfer them into something else. Even if it's just to take your mind off things, because you need a purpose. When you lose your purpose, men don't do very well at all. I am a huge sufferer of this. If I slow down after doing a very big task, I fall apart a little bit. Now, I actually scored 50-50 on industriousness, so I like to be working, but I also like to be mellowed out. I just find the transition period very difficult. Once I'm mellow, and I'm like, I could leave that off. But at the same time, I'm very difficult to transition over. In conscientiousness, I actually scored quite low because I'm not prone to order. I don't like being put in a box. And this is, women score higher on conscientiousness anyway because they like order and things like that. Extroversion, women are higher. In enthusiasm, women are 55% more enthusiastic than men, but in assertiveness, men are more assertive. So this is the trouble that we also have as well. Men are naturally assertive. They're naturally industrious, and they're not as polite. So these are the problems that come across. When we start saying toxic male traits, being assertive, being industrious, and obviously wanting to work on things all the time, and maybe not being so polite, literally, it's just how men are. This even in the Scandinavian model, which is the most egalitarian country in the world, they are finding these traits still stack up. And egalitarian means that they made everything as equal as possible. Women still move one way, men still move the other, because this is how we are built. Now, that's not to say, and I'm going to get into this in a minute, that they're necessarily a good thing all the time, but it's one thing to say, look, you need to keep a lid on this, and we need to figure out how that you can use this constructively, rather than just saying, it's bad. Okay, neuroticism. Women score 60% in neuroticism. Now, neuroticism is your way of overthinking things, your overreaction to things per se. Obviously, it's not quite as high as that. They are 60% more withdrawn, and volatility, they are 50% more volatile than men. Now, the trouble is, yes, women are more volatile than men, but because men are more assertive and are more disagreeable and are naturally more slightly aggressive when we are volatile, it can almost have far worse repercussions. But it's very important to know that overthinking, withdrawal, and volatility are generally higher female traits. Now, again, none of these traits are bad necessarily. It just explains why we behave the way we behave, and there is ancient evolutionary in our DNA reasons why we do that. Because we can't be too volatile as men because they're a far worse condition. You know, if men were volatile all the time, we'd be fighting each other in the street all the time. It would just be how it works. We can't withdraw from things because we are the ones that are seen to protect, and we generally are. If something's kicking off, it's the guy that will go and do the protecting. So withdrawal is not necessarily something that we feel happy doing, and we say not to overthink things too much because if we did that, nothing would get done because we're very task orientated, which absolutely drives women insane. Openness to experience is a 50-50 split down the board. There's almost no difference in openness to experiences. Now, the difference is that women are higher in openness, which means they are generally more open to things, talking, expressing emotions, etc., by 56%. So there's enough there to make a difference. Intellect, which is not your IQ, because women generally tend to score higher in IQ than men, but intellect is your want to investigate things, be involved in stuff, tinker with things, go down the rabbit hole, etc. Men score 55%, which is why men get stuck in tasks. We like building things, and we'll sit there for hours reading, getting involved in instruction things if we decide to read them. And it can drive women insane. Like, I know a few clients whose other halves will sit there for hours researching everything they possibly can before they build something, and they're like, can you not just build it? And for us, it's like, how dare you say that? We've all had that conversation with our other half. They're like, why don't you just do that? And you're like, because that's, whoa, no, because I haven't learned everything about it yet. I need to know how the whole thing works in case something bad happens. These are the big 5 personality traits. They're obviously different to everybody, but it's important to know that where people are scoring in it, okay? We can obviously talk about this a bit more later on. So, these normal traits will cause men to not pick up on things the same way as women. Women are more tuned to negative emotion. Men don't pick up on negative emotions as easy as women because we're not tuned in to do it. And it's a proven fact across the board. Women just find it easier to tune into negative emotion. And we think that is down to a maternal instinct because you had to be very aware if your child wasn't happy, if something was going on, because it could mean something more serious. Men aren't in tune with that as much on the whole. Obviously, that's not every man, and some of the guys listening to this will be like, yeah, but I'm really good at it. That's fine. I'm not saying you're not in individual, but as a whole, we're not tuned into it. And this can also cause friction. You never seem to know when I'm upset. You don't know how I feel. These, again, always negative things that we're being told as guys, that we're not sensitive enough. We don't pick up on negative emotions. The trouble is we don't know how to. The biggest one that I want to also bring up is that men are no longer accountable to men. We do not choose who our alpha is, and it's become something that society has given the job to women. Now, the reason I say it like this is because men have to decide who the alpha male is. Because then we can hold them accountable to upholding the ideals that we have put them under. Now, the alpha male will usually work their way up to the top. They then get put there, and we as men will agree, yes, these have the traits that a man should be. They are strong, they are confident, but they are also wise, they give good counsel, they are kind to people, etc., etc. That has always been the way the alpha male ends up being. Now, that's not to say that, and there hasn't been an alpha male that took it by force. The difference is they don't last very long. They don't. If there is a tyrannical alpha, we get rid of them. We don't like it because they're not bringing anything good. Yes, you are strong and that's great, but it's not enough. It's not enough to just be the strongest guy in the room. You have to also really be the best of everything. Because when you become an alpha, we want you to be the best of everything. We want you to be attractive. We want you to be strong. We want you to be mentally strong. We want you to have a good intellect. We want you to be able to solve problems. And it's a big boot to fill, but we choose that. And the guy that becomes the alpha is supported by the rest of us because we want this to last as long as possible. The problem is that society has turned around and said, no, we can't have men being assertive. We can't have men being socially dominant, etc., etc., etc. Those are toxic male traits because, for whatever reason, I don't really know why it came about, And so now all of a sudden women are choosing, or society-wise, obviously there are more women in society than men, are now choosing what the alpha is. And we're finding it very hard to resonate with that because sometimes it doesn't reflect on who we are. Now, I don't think we even know who alpha males are. Like men will still choose our alpha. We still know who the alpha male in a group is. And it is, again, usually the person who is the least dickish in the group. The one that has the least ego. Is usually counteracted by one who has the most ego. And they work very well because they keep each other in check. In myself and my group of friends, I am the alpha in my group of friends because I have no ego and I can't be goaded and I give as good counsel as possible. Another guy who's a co-alpha with me is the complete opposite. He calls people out. He is the arsehole in the room that makes sure everybody knows exactly that we're on a level playing field. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. He's just using his assertive nature, his lack of politeness, and his general social dominance to keep the group in check. Now, you would look at him and say that he is by social standards, the embodiment of toxic masculinity, yet he is very healthy for our male group. Because if people are getting a bit too, out of their place, he's the first person to shoot them down. Now, then we have, like myself, who will then, smooth the conflict over, but also make a point of saying that you wouldn't have said it if it wasn't true. We have all been thinking it. Maybe he said it in a slightly more brutish way. But it works for us because we have decided how the social structure works. When you take that option away from us, we find it very difficult because if you happen to be the guy that tells it as it is, that isn't actually overly polite, you have no intention of necessarily hurting people, but you're going to say what needs to be said, and you're told that now that you're a toxic male and you need to change who you are, of course your mental health is going to decline because you can't change who you are because it's not necessarily a bad thing. So this is something that we as men need to do. We need to hold ourselves accountable and be like, whoa, that's not acceptable. This is not how you behave. The trouble is as well, because we're told we can't be assertive, we can't necessarily be aggressive and things because these are negative traits, we find it difficult to do that to other guys now because you're just told on the whole that it's bad. Don't be aggressive, don't be assertive, this whole be tough, don't ask for help, whatever. Yes, there's a connotation where, I think it's just misunderstood. I think what we're trying to teach is resilience, and that's something that we actually need. We don't have enough resilience anymore. People crumble at the smallest things now, which I think another thing that attests to mental health is that we're not teaching people to toughen up. Because there are things out there that we are going to have to deal with in a tough way. There is always something out there that's trying to derail us, trying to cause us harm, maybe just trying to confound us in some way. And if we are not resilient enough to deal with it, it causes us to fall apart. Safe spaces don't help. I'm going to put that out there now. Safe spaces are the worst thing that you can give people because it takes them out of learning the resilience to deal with a task. If there's a dragon in the cave, you don't never go to the cave because the dragon doesn't go away. And one day it's going to come out and eat you. What you do is if you want to slay that dragon and solve the problems, you just stand outside the cave for a bit. Then you move in a little bit. Then you move in and you give them the people the tools to slay their, respectful dragons and demons or whatever. Okay, so all of this softening people down doesn't work. It works for women essentially because women are naturally slightly softer. They are more agreeable. They can solve problems differently. Men, on the whole, when you dampen them down, it doesn't work because we have naturally aggressive tendencies. We are overly competitive most of the time. We are assertive. We want to be dominant. We want to be the alpha because we know that from an evolutionary standpoint, it puts us in the best stead. Now, we also know that if we can keep ourselves accountable, men will make sure that that person who becomes the alpha doesn't become a tyrant because you're out. If you become an arsehole, you are quickly out of the group. We don't want you here anymore because you're not bringing anything good to the thing. And we've stopped doing that. We have just stopped. We call each other out. It's all done over the internet. We're not meeting up in groups anymore. There's no confrontation that's healthy because confrontation solves problems. If it breaks into violent confrontation, it's not always a bad thing actually, but sometimes, on the whole, we should try to stay out of it. But we're not doing that regulation ourselves. That's been taken away from us, given to society, and it's been softened down to a point where we don't really know where we start. Now, with all of that was more of an understanding of how I think the problems have occurred. Now, the biggest thing I want to say about men's mental health and how it's going wrong is men are more... Without the personality traits, right? So you've got your top 5 personality traits or the big 5 and their subsections. There's also a things versus people area. Women are more compassionate, more agreeable, etc., etc. They gravitate towards jobs with people. Nurses, teachers, care workers, etc., etc., etc. Anything that involves people, social sciences, anything that involves people, women tend to gravitate more to. Now, that's where a lot of female counsellors come from, which is why I think, unfortunately, and it's not a bad thing, I'm not knocking women in this sense, but because there's more women in that sector than men, I think it's like, this is where we've been trying to deal with things from a female perspective and not a man's perspective. Men are more interested in things. They like to go into engineering, mechanics, STEM research areas, manual labour, and all that kind of stuff, because we're interested in things and we treat each other as things more so. I'm terrible for it. As much as I'm interested in people, I see, and I don't mean this as no, you're just a thing to me. I see people as things that we can work with and we can figure things out. It's fascinating to me in that sense, which is why my approach is slightly different. And I don't like being in boxes, so I don't tend to sign up to too many institutions that are going to tell me how I'm going to do it. The method I think isn't working at the moment in telling men to talk is because there's no task involved in it as well, and it's not social. When we say men need to talk, you need to talk as an individual. Oh, okay, don't feel too comfortable about that because I've got nobody else to back me up if people think that I'm weak. Now, again, if we started allowing men to hang around in groups, and I know this is incredibly difficult given the current climate, but that's why there's been such a massive rise to computer gaming groups, because we still have a job to do. Everyone can take a role. We have a purpose. We have a mission. If we don't perform that properly, we are more likely to talk about it because we want to contribute positively to the group. We want to make sure that our group of males is functioning as good as possible. And we're not doing that at the moment. We're trying to pick people out individually to deal with their issues, and that's not working. And again, I'm not saying you need to talk, but you need to create an environment that works for men to talk. And we're not doing that. We're just saying you need to talk more. Please talk more. Don't commit suicide. Don't, find these things. Yet at the same time, we're not going, right, men are more task orientated. They take great pride in having a title and a role and something that gives them purpose. Okay, men do find more purpose in their titles, in their jobs. That's not to say that everything else isn't important. It's just a massive factor, and we have to acknowledge it. The trouble is we keep saying no because you shouldn't use your job to justify who you are. I don't care whether you should or not. It is what you are. Your task, your job, your means of providing is hugely important. So when men hit 65, and the age will probably go up a bit as the retirement age goes up, they are no longer have a purpose. This is a massive problem that we need to deal with. Also, on the other half, men's testosterone tends to drop around the age of 35. Most men should go on testosterone replacement treatment. We don't even know. I mean, there's a guy called, so you get gynecologists and you get andrologists as well, because andros is the Greek term for man. We should be going as men to talk about what's going on down there. Talking about, is our sperm count up? Are we producing enough testosterone? All of these things affect our mood just as much as female hormones affect females. Yet it's seen as it's a mental problem. It's up here. It's because it's toxic masculinity that's causing men to not talk because they're told they shouldn't. I think that's such a small part of it, because every guy will always turn around and say to his mate, what's up with you? And if they have a good friendship, they'll tell you straight away. I message my friends and I say, how you doing? Feeling like shit. What's up? Oh man, I'm just had enough of things. It's not even like it takes any effort. So for some reason, there's something going on the wider picture that we're missing. And I think it is task-orientated talking. Group sessions are probably better for men, but you have to make sure that they're in a group of people that they want to talk to. You can't expect somebody to turn up to a group and just empty out their feelings all the time. They have to build trust, and they have to know that this group isn't going to judge them for anything. With men, we need to have tasks. We must have goal. We must have orientation. We must have something positive that we are bringing. Otherwise, we find it very hard to justify who we are and what we are doing. And we keep telling men that their job doesn't define them. You are who you are as a person. Yes, of course we know that, but you also have to understand as a society that we are still task orientated. If we are not performing tasks, we are not performing roles, we are not providing, we are going to have a bad time. I'm going to tell you a story about myself. When I was starting up my business on my own, I'd left the security, he uses an air quotes because they weren't that secure, security of having a gym that was paying me a meager wage. I still had it in my head, because at the time when me and my other half got together, we had our first child very early. I was the provider. She was on maternity leave, so I got used to putting in the money. When I became self-employed and doing all this stuff on my own, my money dropped. Yet I still had the job title inside of me that was You must provide. You have to be the one that brings the money home. And I wasn't earning enough. And I was struggling. And I was getting depressed. I was getting anxious. I was getting snappy. I didn't know what to do. And at this point, my other half's money had recovered. And as I say, it has nothing to do in a minute with the money or the status or me feeling that I'm not the breadwinner. That wasn't the problem. It was just that I had set myself a job and I wasn't able to do it. So I spoke to my dad. Now, I am very lucky, and this is where I think this whole theory of men not talking falls flat in their face. I can talk to my dad about anything. My dad can talk to his dad about anything. I can also talk to my other granddad about things as well if I wanted to. It's just I come from a very, very healthy, strong group of males that have very good communication skills. This isn't something that is just non-existent across the board, and most men will be able to talk to their fathers about things. Maybe not in certain depths because they don't understand it or they weren't allowed to talk about it, but we're getting better. And he merely turned around and said, why don't you swap roles? You look after the kids while you build your business up because you have the utmost flexibility. Your other half can then focus on earning the money and paying the bills. And it was like a light switch turned off. And this is what I mean. It had nothing to do with my status as a man. And if I'm a man, I will make the money and I will pay for things. It was, I had a job that I wasn't able to complete. And it was causing me huge amounts of mental stress. Because men do deal in stress differently than women. Women deal with negative emotion. Men tend to just deal with things in a stress response. Okay, so when a guy turns around and says, yeah, I'm just really stressed out, he could be depressed, he could be lonely, he could be anything, but he just registers it as a stress that needs to be fixed because we are task orientated. As soon as I became the main carer of my children, I did the school runs, I could still run my business stuff. I'm fine. I still do it now. I'm still the guy because I have all the flexibility in the world of my job. I can still do all these things. I am the one that does the most school runs. I help with the homework. I'm homeschooling the kids now. I don't feel any less about it because I know that I have a job that I can achieve. And this is the biggest thing. If you are listening and you are struggling right now, especially in this lockdown, it's probably because you don't have a role. To get paid for something and not do it is not the same as actually going out and doing the job and getting paid for it. It's still going to mess with your sensibilities because yes, you technically are something, but you're not performing the task. So it's going to really mess with your head. If you don't have a task, find something. Find anything that gives you something to say that you are. Now, I know that seems very arbitrary, but this is going to massively help with your mental health. Doing small tasks, small achievements. When we use behavioral therapy and personality psychology and stuff, we get people to tidy their rooms to make sure one little space in wherever is as beautiful as possible because that's your responsibility. Men need responsibility. We need to have a goal, and we are not using that in a way to aid men's mental health. We're trying to tell people that they shouldn't feel stressed about things. They shouldn't do this. Let's talk about your problems. No, because a lot of the time, first of all, we don't even know what the problem is a lot of the time. So we need to have a job. We need to have that purpose, and we're not using therapy in the right way. This is why sports, men having groups, men need to be collectively in small groups. We need to have goals and means and tasks and things that we can hold each other accountable to improve our mental health. And it's just become so diluted. And I've watched this happen. I have watched this happen so many times where it was that whole, guys shouldn't be going down the pub, they shouldn't be doing this, they shouldn't be brash, they shouldn't be ballsy, blah, 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 blah. And this is happening in young men. And they can't help themselves because young men are just absolutely full of all these hormones and personality traits and they need to find an outlet. The reason boxing clubs, the most unlikely of places that, really sorts young men out is because they take all of those toxic male traits, quote unquote, and channel them into something constructive. This is what we need to do with men. We don't tell them that their traits are toxic. We don't tell men that they have toxic masculinity. Jesus Christ, if you could shout this from the rooftops, I would really appreciate it. Being a man is not toxic. There are just dicks and there are people. For every toxic male trait, there is a toxic female trait. We don't seem to hear enough about that, yet it's just people being dickheads. Now, don't get me wrong. I work with women who have been at the receiving end of some of the worst human beings that I have ever come across, and they were men. That doesn't mean it's just clearly toxic masculinity. It just means these people are dicks and they need to be fucking sorted out. Boxing clubs, they take all of these youths, they stop them going into gangs, because the reason we go into gangs as kids, not that I ever did, was because you want camaraderie, you want that feel of family. If there's no father on the scene as well, because fatherhood has been massively in decline, and that's not just because men don't want to deal with their kids anymore. There's actually a lot of political things going on with that as well, but that's for another time. They want a strong male lead. They want, again, to find an alpha, hold them accountable, and deal with it that way. That you're told not to, or you don't have a role model, so you find a gang. Boxing clubs, martial arts, all of these other groups that are now in decline because we don't have the social budget for them, which is, again, massively undermining men's mental health, is giving them a means to control all of that aggression, that assertiveness, that need for dominance, and put it in somewhere constructive. If we started telling all of our men that were maybe less polite, maybe more assertive, maybe more social dominant, saying, look, guys, maybe throwing your weight around in a social situation is not so great, but I'll tell you what we can do. You could definitely run a business. You could definitely be constructive with that. We can definitely take that and use it. That's what we need to do. We need to redirect it away from just being told that it's bad and going, no, where can we put this? Where is this energy going to? Because we can make something really good with it. Men have an instant need to fix things, and this is going to come into like the couples issues thing, because another thing that men don't like doing is failing with their other halves. Of course we don't. We want to make our other halves happy. Oh, sorry about that slurp camera there. The trouble is, as men aren't as in tune into negative emotions, we don't notice when our other halves are probably on. Women will notice very quickly if women are not in a good way. Men take a little bit longer. We're not prone to negative emotions. So when you finally sit down and go, oh, well, you seem to be a little bit off there. What's the matter? She's already noticed this days ago, and you haven't. She then comes up and starts explaining what the problem is. Because men have an instant need to fix, we jump in and go, oh, so I'll go fix that then. Now, that's not what a woman wants to hear. And I can tell you this 100% because I deal with this all the time with my clients. Women actually, half the time, don't even know what needs to be fixed. They just want to express negative emotion. Men, on the other hand, have to have something to fix. If a woman came in and said, oh, what's the problem, darling? Oh, you tell you what, I keep getting really pissed off. That door just scrapes on the bottom of that freaking carpet and it's going to ruin it. He'll go out, he'll get a plane, he'll shave that door down, and it'll be done. And she'll be happy, and the man will feel really good and appreciated because he solved a problem for his woman. When it comes to an emotional problem, which maybe doesn't even have anything that needs to be fixed straight away, this is massively troubling for a guy because this is why they butt in with you all the time. Ladies, it's not because they don't listen, it's because they are desperate to solve a problem. And if you haven't given them anything to fix, they will try and insert something that will maybe be something that needs to be fixed. So just a little understanding on that one is that it's not that men are insensitive. It's not that men don't ever listen to you. It's just that we are desperate to take your pain away and we don't know how to do it because you haven't given us maybe something that can be fixed. It could just be that you want to talk about it and get it off your chest. That's fine, but just be a little bit aware that for a lot of guys, we're like, but what needs to be fixed? What do I need to put hammer and nail to? Who do I need to go shout at? What do I need to change for you? And sometimes you can't do that. So it's just understanding on both sides that is the case. Also, men tend to show vulnerability and affection through physicality. We are not natural talkers. We do it with deeds. Men tend to become a lot more, like it's been proven that after the loss of a family member, usually like a grandparent or a parent, men will actually start becoming more sexually active because that's how they show their emotions and their vulnerability. Because that is the most vulnerable time you can be if you're emotional and you're trying to be intimate with your partner. You're looking for love. You're looking for confirmation that there's still some good things. So please be aware that in bad times, men tend to get a lot more intimate very quickly because it's how we express our vulnerability. If there's nothing evident to fix, there are issues in communication or no need to fix because of the communication. So again, this is the last bit really. It's, when men are finding problems, especially with ourselves, the reason, if you talk and say to your bloke, what's the matter? And my other half does this to me all the time, and I finally kind of figured it out the other day. What's the matter? Nothing much really. I know what it is, but there's nothing I can do about it yet, so I'm not worrying about it. That doesn't compute with women. It doesn't, because they're like, all right, you've just told me there's a problem and you're not going to deal with it. Okay, great, fine. And yes, that's what I've said, but it doesn't mean that. What it means is that I have a problem. I haven't found the solution yet, or more importantly, I haven't found what needs to be fixed yet. So until I find what needs to be fixed, I can't give you any more information, so I can't really I can't talk to you about it. Now, if we know what the problem is, we would actually explain to you. Usually it's a thing-orientated thing, and your eyes will glaze over because you're not interested in things as much as people. But that's what gets to us. It's this is why when we say, what's the matter? Oh, just work stress. Now, it could be that, yes, there is actually a problem at work, but you haven't found out the solution to it yet, so all you can identify is there is a problem. That's about as far as men's forward problem solving goes. Is there a problem? Yes. Do I know what that problem is? Yes. Can I fix it yet? Yes. Right, then I can tell you every single thing that's going on because I intend to fix it. Or, is there a problem? Yes. What is the problem? I don't know. Do you know if you can fix anything to make yourself feel better? I don't think so. Do you want to talk about it? No. Because we have nothing to communicate with you. Our communication levels are very much thing orientated, so it's very easy to just go, I have nothing to report back yet. When I do, I shall report to you. So, to wrap up, men's mental health is getting better, I think, but we need to steer it in towards men. Actually, the best way I could imagine to, and if anybody's listening to this, you know what, I will happily start a little live Zoom thing once a week where we can just chat to start with before we start talking about mental health, because we can't get out in groups. After that, it's fine. You know, the men walk talk groups that have are great because it's men getting together and there's a purpose, because, right, we're going to walk 5 miles today. Okay, so I have a goal I can achieve and I'm going to do that. The trouble is it's still talk orientated, not task orientated. We need to create more opportunities for men to come together in small groups, because in big groups, the trouble is big groups get fractious anyway and men will circle off into their small areas. Small groups where they can build relationships, they can then begin to talk, because once we can do that, we can then start finding out what actually the issues are and how the problems are going. Because at the moment, we're just going, men don't talk enough. It's because men don't talk anyway. 15 years we've been doing this, at least, and we still haven't solved the problem. If you have any thoughts on this, I would love for you to share it. If you know any men that are struggling and stuff, it might just give them some ideas. If you could, that'd be amazing. But please reach out to me and we will do what we can together. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and I'll speak to you soon.